Good afternoon. My name is Selim Jahan. I'm the director of the Human Development Report Office in UNDP. I'll start with three initial observations, very short one. First, it is always a privilege and an honor to follow Frances. I don't know whether I can get to that level of clarity and the knowledge, but I'll try my best. Second, I'm acutely aware that both my fellow panelists and I do not have the right to remain silent, but whatever we say can be used against us because it will be recorded. And the third initial presentation point is I'm one of the usual suspects. I spent 9 years in the 1990s within the Human Development Report Office, and I'm back there again last year. So I don't claim, but you can say that I've been there and seen it all. No. I think 25 years ago, the journey of the Human Development Approach and the Human Development Report started with a very simple message, and that was that people should be at the center of development, and development is all about enlarging people's choices. A very simple statement, but with far-reaching implications. And I'll just highlight three of those implications. With that simple message, exploring various themes and possibilities, 23 global human development reports have been produced. More than 700 national and subnational human development reports have been produced. The second implication is that with those reports, with the approach and the measurements, we have been able to, with all humility I can say, influence policies, influence measures and approaches, and to some extent basically change the mindset of development practitioners, which is the most difficult task in development business. And third implication that I want to highlight is that the Human Development Report and the approach have actually influenced the work of academics, researchers, work of the development advocates, development practitioners, NGOs, CSOs. So over the years, I think both the approach and the report have had its impact quite widely all over the world. 25 years later, we live in a world which is different from the 1990s. We live in a world where things have changed. We have new development challenges. We also have a world where, even though lots of progress have been made, there are significant human development deprivations. So in that context, I think it's only fair that we feel that the time has come when we should look at the whole issue of human development ahead in terms of the conceptual framework as well as its measurements, so that in coming decades, this approach can provide the kind of the insights as well as the kind of the approaches that would be needed to meet the emerging development challenges. So in that context, when we talk about human development ahead, I just want to make three fundamental points, and I will elaborate them. The first, that we cannot talk about human development ahead unless we know the context in which the concept and the measurements have emerged in the 1990s. Second, it would also be useful to talk a little bit about how the world has changed. What are the kind of the challenges that we face? What are the kind of the issues that we have to tackle as we move forward? And third, we also would like to talk a little bit about the kind of the thoughts and the thinking that is going with regard to the concept and the measurements, some of the issues that I would like to share with you and get you use your comments, your feedbacks, as well as your advice and guidance as we move forward. In 1990, the whole pursuit of human development was driven by the fact that we want to take the road less traveled by. At that point in time, the development paradigm was very much influenced by the growth paradigm. There had been lots of preoccupations with material opulence, the material wealth, and in that kind of a drive, people were pushed more and more to the periphery. So therefore, the Human Development Report and the Human Development Approach tried to bring people to the center of the periphery. So the approach of the people-centered development was the crux of the Human Development Approach. And we started with that simple statement that human development is the process of enlarging people's choices. And choices can be enlarged when there are enhanced capabilities and there are also improved opportunities. And that's the kind of an equation that the Human Development Approach wants to balance. If you have lots of capabilities built but not sufficient opportunities, you have human frustration. You have lots of opportunities there, but the capabilities are not built, you have missed opportunities. So therefore, I think the basic idea of human development, which is very much anchored into the paradigm of human rights and human security, is to provide a kind of an approach where people can have a healthy, creative life, which can be quite fulfilling to them. With that kind of paradigm, the whole question of measures of human development came in. And at that point in time, we decided that we'll have two approaches to the measures. One, we'll have the breadth measure, which is more or less the human development accounting. You have the different human development indicators ranging, for example, infant mortality rate, under 5 mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, and all other kind of the indicators. And you can have also a focus measure where you basically take certain basic dimensions of human development, try to construct a composite index, and then go on. Both the breadth measure, which is basically a human development accounting, and the focus measure, which resulted in the Human Development Index later on, have their pluses and minuses. The Human Development Accounting gives you a comprehensive picture of the state of human development in every society. But it does not give you a single number with which you can do a lot of things. The composite index gives you a single number which can draw attention, can be quite useful and powerful for advocacy and all kinds of things. And therefore, I think at that point in time, we thought that the focus measure is also important, because the human development approach, and particularly the Human Development Report, being the new kid on the block, needed something to draw attention to the kind of the approaches and the kind of the reports there. That said, I think I just want to make 5 points here. One, we are very mindful of the fact that even though we construct a composite index which have their limitations which are well known, you need a strong theoretical foundation to come up with a measure of a particular concept. Sometimes we are very much driven by the fact that we have beautiful data, we have all the statistical methods, let us go for some kinds of computations and permutations and come up with a number which may not mean anything. But the Human Development Index and the related measures have had a very strong theoretical foundation. Point number 2, that whatever measure you have, no matter how perfect it is, it can never capture the full breadth of any concept. So therefore, there's no illusion on our part to say that the Human Development Index captures all aspects of human development. It's not. That's not the purpose of the Human Development Index. Third, the Human Development Index is as vulgar as GDP per capita, but it is not as blind as GDP per capita to the broader aspects of human well-being. Fourth, if you allow me to use a metaphor, the Human Development Accounting, or if you think of a dashboard, is the house, and the Human Development Index is the door. My only plea would be, do not mistake the door to be the house, and do not stop at the door, enter the house. So with that kind of an approach, I think in 1990, we started the Human Development Reports, we started the Human Development Approach, and we moved forward. The second issue is, what is the world that we are living in right now? The broader trends are all known. We know that the growth poles have shifted. We know the economic powers have been rebalanced. We know the emergence of the BRICS and what they mean. We also know that impressive progress has been made, but the progress have not been even between regions, between countries, within countries, on different planes. We all know that. I'm not going to deal in details all those issues, but I just want to highlight 3 or 4 major features of this changing world. The first one is that inequalities are increasing. We live in an unequal world where there are inequalities in terms of opportunities and inequalities in terms of outcomes are also increasing. The second trend, we also know that sustainability is now a major issue. The whole question of the environmental sustainability, political and social sustainability are on the minds of people in different parts of the world. We also know that there has been an increasing connectivity of people because of the technological revolution and digital revolution. It has a plus part of it, it has a minus part of it. The plus part is, of course, that we can have better information, we can use those for social mobilization, we can also interact with each other quite freely and also quite quickly. The minus is there are human development implications there, because now that we have all these gadgets with us, some of the finer things in life are missed. We go on a vacation, but we also have our iPad on our left and our iPhone on our right. So you are basically not hooked off the work, off your office, off the kind of the things you do. So that quality time with family, the involvement with the community, and that kind of thing is missing. 3 people may be living under the same roof, connecting with the rest of the world, but not with each other. So therefore, those have the human development costs there, and I want to highlight that particular point. The fourth trend, we also know that there are different kind of emerging challenges. There are emerging challenges in terms of human insecurity. There are emerging challenges in terms of violation of human rights. There are emerging challenges of the opportunities at the global level among different groups of people. And those are some of the challenges which will have impact on human development in coming years. My third and the final point, having said all this, we are now looking at some of the issues, A, on the analytical front, where the frontiers of human development thinking may be extended, and B, on the issues of measurements and the indicators, where there can be new thinking and new approaches. Let me focus on the first front, on this analytical part of it. First, when we talk about the choices, so far the human development approach basically concentrated on individual choices, and that's fine. But now we are increasingly facing situations where the individual choices and collective choices may not go in the same direction. And particularly with demographic transition, with changes in societies, there are instances where there are tensions between individual choices and collective choices. So therefore, the issue is, what does it imply for the human development approach? And also, equally importantly, what does it mean in terms of policies, the trade-offs, how you deal with that tension? That's one. The second thing that we have to look at is that when we talk about particularly the human development approach and the Human Development Index, we have said that long and healthy life, knowledge, decent standard of living, they are valued equally. From a philosophical point of view, that's fine. But we also know that from a policy making point of view, and given the reality on the ground, there are hierarchy of choices. There are priorities that people have to make every day. There are priorities that the communities have to make. And there are priorities which the policymakers at the policy level have to make. So the question therefore is that if there are hierarchies of these different dimensions of human development, how does that particular issue is going to be tackled by this approach? The third is the whole question of the sustainability. There has been a question, I think, in the earlier session, and I know that Francis has basically put two people to answer that question. Maybe I'll come back later on. But I think the whole issue of the sustainability is absolutely important. And it's not only environmental sustainability. The political sustainability and social sustainability, as we are seeing in different regions of the world, are absolutely important. The whole question is, how do you deal with that kind of sustainability? We struggled, absolutely. We tried, absolutely. But then we couldn't come up with the kind of the answers that will deal with those issues. That's important. Fourth, in many human development reports, we have talked about human rights as the anchor of human development. We have also talked a lot about human security, and we have said human development, human rights, human security, they are mutually reinforcing or mutually help each other. But I think we also have to go beyond that and see whether there are kind of a causal relationship, whether the presence of human development has to be, or the progress in human development has to be dependent on the two others, whether human security is the cause of enhanced human development or it is the outcome of enhanced human development. Some of those issues, I think, need to be put on the table in terms of the conceptual issues so that we can have a better discussion of those issues. The point I'm trying to make, that revisiting some of those issues is not taking the fundamental basic tenets of human development, but basically looking at some of the issues which we have not addressed so far, and looking at some of the issues that might be there as we move forward. For example, in coming decades, the whole question of shocks and vulnerabilities would not be an exception, but a norm. So when the human development progress are thrown off the track by shocks and vulnerabilities from different sources, what do? What does human development mean in a conflict or post-conflict situation? Does it simply mean merely human survival or human compromise? What does choices mean in that particular context when people are struggling with their lives or just trying to keep alive? So these are difficult questions, but I think as we want to move forward and we talk about human development ahead in the new world, these are the questions that we have to answer. Similarly, on the questions of measurements and indicators, some of the issues I have already alluded to, but then there are also other issues that we have to deal with it. For example, often I hear the discussions, and there is also this drive among different groups. Well, include this particular indicator or that particular indicator into the Human Development Index and broaden it? Is that the kind of the approach that we have to take? The environmental sustainability is an issue that people have put on the table, but at the same time, sometimes the problem is that when we talk about a long and healthy life, knowledge, a decent standard of living, they are universally valued. The fundamental building block, one of the fundamental building blocks of the human development approach is the universality of life claims. So those are the things universally valued in a rich country, in a poor country, in the north, in the south, in Asia, in Africa. But when it comes to environmental sustainability, sometimes, with all due respect to my colleagues coming from the environmental side, they are not very, sometimes they don't agree what would actually tackle the environmental issues from developing regions to the developed regions. If I go to Central Asia, salinization may be the kind of the environmental issue that they are most concerned with. Is that the same kind of environmental issue which is relevant for other purposes? CO2 emission is a big thing in many countries, but I come from Bangladesh, and then if you talk to a Bangladeshi, they will say, well, we have nothing to do with generating the CO2, but we are sinking. So I think those are some of the very complicated issues in environmental sustainability, and how do we deal with that issue. Third, I think we also have to make a kind of an approach where we balance between what I call the dashboard approach versus the composite indicator approach, the breadth approach and the focus approach. How do we do that? Because in the dashboard approach, we may have a lot of indicators and the numbers, but the problem is people will look at them, nod at them respectfully, and then will go away and continue using the GDP per capita for all practical purposes. So therefore, if we really want to have a dashboard approach as well as a focus approach, how do you balance that so that you can optimize the whole situation? Final point on this particular issue is that there are lots of data now available. There are the big data issue. There is the real-time data issue. So therefore, how we can capitalize on some of those data that are not quote-unquote traditional data, but more than that. We also have different kinds of statistical techniques that are available. So what do you do with those kind of the things? I think those would be absolutely important. In conclusion, I think it's an important thing that we talk about choices in the human development approach, because going beyond the human development approach and its measurement, the choice is important. The kind of the choices that we make today and the next year, for example, would also determine what would be the future of human development reports in, say, 20, 30 years. But more importantly, the choices we make with regard to the approach, with regard to the measurements and others, will also kind of determine what kind of world we will have, what kind of world we leave to our future generations. Because in the ultimate analysis, the human destiny is a choice and not a chance. Thank you.
Please, you first.
You were supposed to be the second speaker, I think.
You are the second.
Okay,
If that's okay for you.
that's okay for me, but Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the UNDP and the HDRO in particular for inviting me to be participating in this panel. And I would like to begin by congratulating the UNDP and the HDR office for bringing to the forefront of the development debate and policies a new concept, the concept of a new, in the sense, the formalizing the concept of human development, and bringing it to the forefront some 25 years ago with the launch of the Human Development Reports. I think it is a major step forward in, and a major shift in the development paradigm, not only in the international circles and policy debates, but also I think it started off a whole range of research questions and research topics in the academic circles. And now, even coming from the academic side, the literature on human development and its underlying theoretical framework, which is obviously the capability approach, is vast and rapidly growing. I think this is a big achievement. So while you might say, why are we congratulating you now that it's happened 25 years ago, but I think it is still relevant because I think UNDP and HDRO have played a major role in not only bringing it to the forefront, the new concept, but also in keeping it there at the forefront of the development debates and discussions. Another major step forward at the same time was the launch of the Human Development Index, and Salim talked about the two different things, and I would call it a different phenomenon because one should make a clear distinction between what the concept is and what the index is. And for the first time, with this Human Development Index, policymakers and countries had a measure which was simple, easily understandable, easy to monitor, and which was a powerful rival to the GDP per capita, which was used as the traditional welfare measure. And it not only it gave a rival measure to GDP, but also created a healthy competition among countries in trying to push their positions up in the international ranking. But I think it is important to keep the distinction between the concept and the index, because the index is much more restrictive than the concept, and the concept is much wider than the index. So now that 25, at least since the first Human Development Report, 25 years have passed, and the index is quite well understood, I think, both in policy circles and in other, and of course in the academic sphere. I think it's time to make maybe we are at a crossroad, indeed at a crossroad, and revisit the concept and make some fundamental changes in it. And I'm probably going to be repeating myself repeating what the others have already said, especially Francis and Salim, but I think these are important things and probably worth repeating. And these fundamental changes that I'm going to be talking about are also reflections, are not kind of original ideas, but reflections of where the development debate has been going over the recent years. And I think it is important to include that into the concept and the measure that we are trying to describe in terms of human development reports. I would focus my remarks and recommendations on three aspects in terms of how one can go forward. First, in widening the scope of the concept itself, and look at the indicators and measure next, and then go to the methodological side, which is, by the way, I'm a professor of econometrics at the University of Geneva, so I'm very interested in the methodology of construction of indicators, so I would go to that, dwell a little bit on that at the end. Regarding the concept, as I said, the index is much more restrictive than the concept, and I think it is probably time to go beyond the dimensions that are in the current HDI to include at least 2 or 3 more fundamental dimensions for human well-being and human progress. And these are, I think, we have talked, I mean, the dimensions are going to be the same as ones mentioned in the earlier speeches, but I think they are present to a certain extent in the human development reports, but I think it's time that they entered in a big way. The first, and the dimensions that the current index actually covers, like health and education, are no doubt highly important. They are fundamental, they are basic, and they have to stay. But I think other dimensions have become equally fundamental and basic in defining what is human well-being. And Salim was mentioning, individual choice versus collective choices. And I think one way to look at that is to ask ourselves the question, is one individual progressing, or the well-being of one individual improving at the expense of another, or in more general terms, is a group of individuals, a section of the population progressing at the expense of other sections, other groups? And when we think about these questions, obviously the social justice and inequality comes to our mind. And I think it is high time that it entered, probably I'm going to kind of disagree with some of the earlier speakers, it entered in a big way in the human development measure, and not just in terms of an adjustment made to the index. I think there are inequality adjustments made to the index, and I think it is a very, very good thing to do. But I think inequality and social justice have become equally important as being able to be educated and healthy, being able to live in a just society, I think is an important part of well-being, ingredient of well-being, and I think it should enter in a big way as a dimension on its own. And when I'm talking about inequality and injustice, it's not just the distribution of income or something like that, of course, that is there, but inequality in the multiple dimensions that we are talking about, inequality in health, education, in all the other dimensions that are relevant for human well-being. And not just inequality across individuals, but also inequalities among different groups, among different ethnic communities or different religious communities, between men and women, between rural and urban. So all aspects of inequality in the multiple dimensions that we are concerned with, I think that could make a dimension in itself. Social justice, as I said, or social, and then discriminatory practices could be, countries could be penalized for discriminatory practices, and on the other hand, rewarded for equal distributions of well-being. So I think it could be one way of widening the scope of the measure to actually reflect and get it closer to the concept of human development that we are trying to represent. And in fact, one can also bring in measures of social capital. There are measures of social capital that exist, the cohesion, social cohesion, and in fact, one very well-known example of that is trust, and I think that was taken as one of the measures in another session or in this one, where how people, what is the trust people have among each other in their institutions and other things. So there could be, that I think that should come in a big way. Another question, another aspect that should come in and that we've already talked about is the environmental quality. I think environmental quality, again, and sustainability is not just something which promotes human development or which comes alongside human development. I think it is part of human development. Part of human capabilities, opportunities, and well-being is to be able to live in a clean and healthy environment, and I think that is very much an ingredient and a fundamental aspect of human development. And I think it also answers the question of whether we are developing at the expense not of other people currently, but of people to come in the future. So that's also, there's some element of justice and social concerns there. So I think, again, another key dimension I would like to see in the human development measure, not as an adjustment, but as a dimension in itself, is the quality of the environment, the natural resources, the depletion or not of the natural resources. And of course, these are dimensions that are being talked about, kind of, they have universal agreement and being talked about in many development circles. And it's not the first time, because we do have environmental performance indices, green economy index. So there are measures coming up, and it's not going to be the first time that one would be thinking of such measures when we're talking of development and progress. Now, coming to so that's trying to widen its scope, and then there is another one, I think, which is very important, which Salim referred to, is the security and safety, which is again integral part of well-being, and especially conflict zones of conflicts and whether in wars or civil conflicts. Is important to bring that into, though I understand that could be more politically sensitive, but I think in terms of the fundamental constituents of well-being, and that's something also fundamental in my view of the initial concept of enhancing people's enhancing the opportunities and choices of people to have a good life. Now, looking at the existing dimensions and the indicators that are chosen for these dimensions, of course, as Salim said, there are improvements. And I think one way to think about it is to probably get in some indicators which are faster moving than the current ones. Like the life expectancy is, of course, a very good indicator in health, but of course it doesn't move very fast. And there could be other indicators like mortality rates that you mentioned, infant mortality, child mortality, maternal mortality, which could bring out the minus aspect of health, and say that there shouldn't be any. I mean, we are in the 21st century where there shouldn't be any, very much maternal mortality. And so if that exists, then that is lack of progress in the health dimension. And also in the education dimension, we talked about years of schooling, mean years of schooling, which is referring to the whole population, is going to be moving very fast. I think the idea to bring in these other indicators is not just to add to the list of indicators, but also to be able to reward countries which are making progress in certain aspects of these dimensions, which are not necessarily reflected in the indicators chosen, and therefore there could be some frustration in terms of, without this, there could be frustration in terms of, moving up in the position, or in terms of the effort being not showing up in the index. And in the education, again, I think there are lots of indicators that could come up, that could be included, especially the percentage of not just enrollment, but the percentage of graduates, or with respect to the cohort population, not the whole population, but with respect to the corresponding cohort population, you can include the skills aspect, not just the schooling, because now, of course, it's very, very well accepted that knowledge doesn't come only from the school aspect. There are other ways of acquiring knowledge. And I think skills is a very important, I mean, how skilled the population is, I think, is an important aspect of education now. So you could reflect the number of, vocational skills and professional skills that the population has in terms of certain indicators. I mean, I'm not going to list the indicators, but these are the ideas of what other things can one bring in. And IT, I think IT one cannot ignore, and as you said, there are minuses of IT penetration that probably, we're having less family time and more connectivity, but I think there are also pluses in terms of IT, and IT is becoming a major tool in terms of expansion of knowledge. Knowledge is everywhere. If you're connected, you do get access to a lot of knowledge which you would otherwise not have. And especially also distance learning is becoming very, very important in education itself. So I think IT penetration in the society and people having access to IT would be a good indicator of how, what the progress in terms of knowledge is. And finally now, so expand dimensions to bring it closer to the concept that it should be measuring or trying to measure. Probably choose more other indicators which could be faster moving than the ones that you already have. And then the methodology. Again, there is no one unique answer to what kind of methodology to combine, whether we need to combine, whether we need to give it as an aggregate index, or we can just give all the indicators and let the researcher or the analyst decide what they want to choose from there. There is no one approach, but I think one should probably promote the idea that there are many approaches. Having one index is useful for certain purposes, one number is useful for certain purposes, but there are other approaches, and I think also it's important to bring out the variety of approaches that are available in measuring human development. And coming because of my background, I would have a particular inclination towards at least mentioning and exploring other approaches which are based on statistical models and econometric models, which try to go beyond indicate. They have I think these statistical models they serve many purposes. One is, I think when you have indicators which are correlated, and we saw that many indicators are correlated, there are tools and techniques which can extract the common aspect among the different indicators, and not kind of the fact that some indicators are correlated might give undue weight or importance for certain aspects. I mean, take a simple case, you have one dimension, 3 indicators. The first 2 indicators are highly correlated. So that means they're more or less capturing the same thing, x1 and x2, let's say. And there is another third indicator, x3, which is not so correlated. So which means that is capturing some other aspect of the well-being in that dimension. Now, if you just take these 3 together and put it into an index, you are giving double the importance to the first aspect and half the importance, if you want, to the second aspect. Whereas if you try to apply another approach, like a factor analytic approach or something else, then you are trying to extract the common aspect of the hidden common aspect among these three indicators, and take into account the high correlation and the not so high correlation between these indicators, and also the fact that some of these could be measured with error. So take the noise out and try to extract the essence which is hidden in these indicators. And I think I'm not saying this is in replacement of construction of composite indices. This could be in addition to, and so that you can have other ways of measuring have other ways of getting to the indices. And another way to look at it is also saying that we are going beyond just the indicators, which in the terminology of the capability approach would be called functionings, and to the actual what is hidden in these indicators, which is the capability, which is the opportunity to develop, the opportunity to progress. So I think this could also help in trying to go beyond functionings to the capability level, and which could also, and in doing that, because we have a model, which could also bring out certain relationships, and not just association relationships, but also some possible causal relationships. And that's another direction that I would like to kind of privilege, is to go beyond descriptives, see what the picture is, and to try to see what are the links and the causal relationships that one can find out. And here again, econometric and statistical models have a role to play, and that could, I'm not saying HDI should be doing, Human Report Office should be doing it, but I think encouraging kind of research in this direction, I think, would be a very welcome thing in order to go beyond descriptive measures and to go into structural, to identifying structural relationships. And finally, I would end the methodological aspect by saying that I'm also a big fan of dashboard approaches. So I don't believe in just, as I said, there is no one approach. You could have an index approach. You could also have a dashboard approach. And I'm very, I really admired the recent contest that you have of, the visual contest. And there were very good ideas were presented in this contest. And the first one where there's the tree and the petals or the branches fall off as you increase the threshold of well-being and increase the minimum well-being. There's a tree with each branches, each leaf, I think, petal or leaf, which is representing one country. And then if you say my minimum well-being is this much, and as you increase the minimum well-being or that you think that everyone should have, a lot of countries fall off the tree, a lot of petals or leaves fall off the tree because they don't satisfy the minimum criteria. I think that was a very nice attempt. And I think this is one of my dreams, and I think I did discuss with you that ideally I would like to see kind of a map, world map, where you can point to any country and look at the human development, the most aggregate measure of human development, but also have a way of going down from the aggregate to the different components, so the dashboard, all the indicators, and choose the methodology of construction of the different indices, whether you want to do an arithmetic average, a geometric average, or factor analysis, or a structural equation, or whatever. Have a choice, and have a choice of including some indicators, excluding some indicators, including some dimensions, excluding some dimensions, and see how the world changes. And in terms of also, as somebody was talking about, not only remaining at the national level, but also be able to go to the regional level, go to the village level, go to the micro individual level. So ideally, a kind of, where you would have, you can make your own decisions, but you have the whole information in front of you, the index, they constitute the components of the index on the indicators, and how you do the choice as to how you want to combine the indicators, and some other variables which could then be used as to find the patterns in terms of, whether we said good governance, does it imply good human development, or good, whether it's something else. So the social setup, the institutional setup. So all those could be also added so that you can try to have linkages. So that would be a kind of, again, not in replacement of the index, but also along with the index, one could have different ways of presenting the same information on a very interactive basis, and I hope someday that dream will be realized. But I think these are some of the directions in which I thought Human Development Index, a Human Development Concept and Index can be taken forward in the next years to come. Thank you.
So good afternoon. I'm Gaël Giraud. I'm a French economist. I'm the newly appointed chief economist of the French Development Agency, which is the French analog of USAID. Thank you, Selim, for giving me the opportunity to comment on your very nice talk. I will be very brief, so don't worry. I just want to comment on a few points that you stressed. First of all, on the door and house metaphor, then on inequality, then on sustainability, environmental sustainability, then on the dilemma between collective choices and individual choices. So let me begin with the metaphor of the door and the house. I totally agree with what you said and what my colleague said, that it's a kind of crux that we have in our field, that we need both the dashboard approach and also the index approach. And we have to live with both of them and to use both of them given our needs. I just want to give another example as an illustration of this, which is the Relational Capability Index that will be presented by some colleagues who are now in the room, I guess tomorrow morning. So the idea is, how do you capture through one index social cohesion? So what we try to do with this bunch of colleagues is that we built an index with 3 pillars that we discussed a couple of months ago. One first pillar is how connected are you? I mean, do you have an access to a road, to facilities, to health infrastructure? Can you listen to radio, etc.? Second pillar, the private relationships. How many people do you live with in the same roof? How many friends do you have, etc.? Third pillar, social and political commitments. Are you a member of a youth group, religious group, etc.? So, and then the issue is, how do you aggregate them in order to build one single index, the Relational Capability Index, okay, which aims to capture something like social cohesion. And it turns out then that when using this index, we definitely need both the index itself and also to disaggregate it and to look carefully at each pillar, and even within each pillar at each component of the pillar. So this is just an illustration of the fact that definitely we need to learn to live with this dilemma. Second point, inequality. I definitely do agree that this is one of the major topics today. I just want to make a few comments on this. First comment is that I do believe that the work, the very celebrated and famous work by my friend and colleague Thomas Piketty was very helpful in the sense that it brought on the forefront of the world agenda inequality. But at the same time, it's a huge loss of time because probably the analytics of Piketty is very bad and does not help us understand inequality. This point has been made very clearly by many people now, including Joe Stiglitz, Daron Acemoglu, etc. The main problem, I think, is that in the work by Piketty, there is a confusion between the wealth and capital. And if you mix both of them, if you make the confusion between them, you don't understand anything. The main problem is wealth inequality and not capital inequality, it seems to me. The second big issue with the analytics of Thomas Piketty is that he's using the very famous and celebrated solo growth model where there is no money. And I'm wondering how you can talk about money, about capital, with a model which is a non-monetary real model. So it's kind of, paradox in itself. Fortunately, there are alternatives which are now growing. The first one I want to mention is by Joe Atkinson. And so, for instance, as you know, the Gini index is a very poor index, even though it's very useful, but it's not enough. So Joe Atkinson has an index, the Atkinson Index, which is, I think, very promising and interesting in the sense that it helps capture the tail, what's happening on the tail. So, and it's much more useful than just looking at the 1% people who are very rich. So the Atkinson Index is very interesting, it seems to me. And second, Joe Stiglitz, is publishing a bunch of 4 papers on the link between growth and inequality. And it seems to me this is one of the missing points in economic theory today, that it's very hard to link them together, at least within standard mainstream models. So Joe Stiglitz is trying to do this, and I'm also trying to do this with a friend of mine, Matteo Scarselli, in a paper that I'm probably going to present here maybe next year. The third point is sustainability, environmental sustainability. On this issue, I just wanted to make clear that it seems to me that, green growth is probably one of the new myths that we have today. I don't believe at all in it, in the sense that I don't see empirically any evidence of the fact that we can have a decoupling between our emissions of greenhouse gas on the one hand and growth of GDP on the other hand. So if we can't make it, that is, if we can't increase the GDP without at the same time increasing approximately proportionately the emission of greenhouse gas, then probably we should give up trying to increase GDP. And I know that this is a very provocative assessment that if I say it in France, probably I will lose my job, but I can say it to you. Working on development, we should, I think, seriously think of it and think of trying to think economics without using growth as, the alpha and the omega of what we should try to foster. On this very same issue, there is also another point I want to make, which is ecological debt. You mentioned this issue, that probably we should change the accounting, the way we account the performance of a country, trying to take into account the ecological debt of the country. As you know, the United Nations and also the World Bank are publishing since many years now figures on this issue, but it's clear to me and to everybody, I guess, that we need more data on this issue. So we need to be able to capture in a sense that makes, in a way that makes sense, the size of the devastation in biodiversity, ecological devastation that each country is performing in order to have some meaningful account of the performance of the country. Third, still on this issue, it seems to me that the ecological challenge is also questioning even our very basic political philosophy, in the sense that the question that is raised by ecological challenges is the following: what kind of choices can we make today, given the fact that the generations that will live on Earth in a couple of decades are not yet here to complain? And if you think about it, if you think about the way we understand democracy in our liberal parliamentarian countries, democracy is a way, an arrangement where you can build institutions where everybody in principle should be able to complain in case he or she believes that she or he is a victim of injustice. But now those future generations are not here to complain. So think for instance of the veil of ignorance of John Rawls and the original position. He assumes that people who are involved in what's going on are behind the veil and can think about what's going on. But those generations are not yet here, so they cannot take part to the choice of the just constitution. And so that's why it seems to me the capability approach becomes very relevant in this context. And especially what Martha Nussbaum is trying to do, that is trying to put again in the capability approach some normative, minimum thresholds, so that you don't need to take the place of the others, especially of the next generations, and to make choices in their place. But you can say carefully, we believe that there are some minimum thresholds that everybody should have, including the next generations. But you immediately understand that these conflicts with the way we understand democracy today. So there is a big, I think, philosophical challenge raised by the ecological issue. The next point I want to comment on is the dilemma that you mentioned, Selim, between collective choices and individual choices. One way to understand it, it seems to me, is to look at the very promising concept studied by Elinor Ostrom on common goods and common resource pools. It seems to me this is a way we could think about development. That is, which kind of common goods do we have in a society? Which kind of institutions can we build to promote these goods, to help them flourish, which requires a radical shift of viewpoint. Most economists, including myself, are used to think in terms of underemployment, GDP, and whatever, inflation, etc. And now this would require you to think in terms of institutions, collective choices, collective bargaining, so that people collectively can promote a common good. And this seems to be very promising. You could think, of course, in terms of common goods, you can think of land, which is a very important common good and which will be very important in the coming years, given the fact that agriculture probably won't be able in the coming decades to give food to everybody on Earth. You could also think of water, drinkable water, clean water as a common good, and you know that in regions like Sahel or Middle East, water will be and is already the big issue. You can think also of energy. Having an access to energy is already a big issue and will be more and more a big issue. Is energy a common good? If yes, how do we succeed in constructing institutions that promote energy as a common good? But you could also think of money as a common good. Is money a common good? If yes, is it right to privatize money, that is to give the power of money creation just to private banks? This is a question that we could raise, for instance, in the Eurozone. And just to finish, I just want to mention a last aspect that you did not mention, Selim, and I would be very happy to discuss with you on this, which is, it seems to me that, I mean, we are used to think in terms of, having dashboards which give you static pictures, especially for countries. Now it might be the case that we also need, as a complementary viewpoint, something like a systemic and dynamic standpoint. Let me just try to illustrate this. It turns out that most of the people who went out of extreme poverty in the sense of the World Bank, that is, who went out of the threshold of $1.25 a day in the last 20 years were Chinese. At least 800 million of these people were Chinese. So the fact that they went out of extreme poverty has nothing to do with the Washington consensus or with liberalization or with austerity programs or adjustment plans. Okay. Now, if you think about it, how did China succeed in helping these people getting out of extreme poverty? And then you could try to tell the following story. It turns out that after the Second World War, the US was the unique country with a big surplus, commercial surplus at this time. The second country having this was Switzerland, but which was almost nothing at the macroeconomic level. So the big challenge for the US at this time in 1945, and especially for the administration in Washington, here in this city, was to try to build an effective demand in the world that would absorb the industrial surplus of the US. And that's why they put into practice the Marshall Plan, even with countries that were responsible for the war, namely Germany and Japan. And it might be the case that today in the Eurozone we could think about it instead of killing Greece, organizing a Marshall Plan for Greece. I close this parenthesis. Now, this changed totally in the 70s, where, as you know, the US became at this time a deficit country for the first time. So this changed radically the picture. And then the question for the North Americans was not who is going to consume our products, but was who is going to produce the products we need. And this is where developing and emerging countries entered into the picture, especially China. And as you know, until 2008, we had a kind of big mechanism where, roughly speaking, let's say China would produce the products that would be consumed by North American households and also partially by European households, and the quantity of money that China would earn through this process would be recycled by financial markets, by Wall Street and by London, and especially by buying the public debt of the US. And so this was a kind of, you might think, virtuous or vicious circle, okay, which helped China, helping these 800 million people getting out of the extreme poverty. Now, as you probably guess, this circle is broken since 2008 because we have made the experience that financial markets are not able to provide stability. And as you know, Chinese authorities today are trying to redirect the industrial products toward the domestic market. Whether they will succeed or not, I don't know. Nobody knows, I guess. But probably most of the prosperity of southern countries will depend upon this. Because if China does not succeed, then China will take the position that was taken by the US in 1945. Namely, China will be looking for countries that could absorb its own industrial surplus. And one might think that China would be able to to launch a Marshall Plan towards some emerging country, like, let's say, Brazil or another country, or Sub-Saharan Africa. Why not? But you see, by raising these questions, I'm taking a viewpoint that you cannot understand if you just look at the dashboard of a country. You need to have another viewpoint, which is more systemic, more dynamic, and more history-related, where you look at the big imbalances in the world. And maybe this might help understand how development is going to look like in the next decades. Thank you. So I guess maybe there's time for questions.
Your presentation as well as for the discussion. I have just a short comment and a quick question. The short comment is that, of course, as an economist, and in particular as an economist interested in measurement stuff, I can just be happy to hear that you are considering the possibility to extend and to rethink, to refine the measurement of human development. However, as a citizen or a global citizen, I also a little bit scared about the fact that at the end of the day, the risk is that you have something that is quite hard to manage, quite hard to defend, quite hard to explain to a general audience, including, of course, to policymakers. So I think that one strength points of the human development is that it has a strong theoretical framework behind it, but then nonetheless, particularly in the past, it was very easy to understand, it was easy to communicate, and this was powerful. So I would be just aware about the fact that
Absolutely.
even if it's important to rethink and to redefine concept and measures, nonetheless, the scope of the human development, if the scope is just to have the opportunity to call the attention on this important aspect and to be used in terms of policy making and as well as in terms of media, I think that is important to preserve is simplicity, that is also its strength. On this regard, I think that this is also compatible with the discussion that we are having here. Probably what you should consider is to have a sort of intermediate position, so to preserve a sort of core dimensions of human development, measure, maybe you can refine the way with the type of indicator, the kind of indicators that you are using, and maybe just to try to introduce a sort of satellite, I don't know if the term is appropriate, accounting related to several dimensions that you think that also on the basis of the open discussion that you are having, you think that are important, and on these dimensions to provide a dashboard with the measures, maybe with some easy to communicate manner to show these measures, and to see what could be the reaction, what could be the debate that can take place at the more general audience. As far as the further question, I would just curiosity, how all this discussion is related to the forthcoming Sustainable Development Goals, which is this sort of monster. Sorry, I'm very happy to see again the discussion that is taking place there, but I'm a little bit scared or worried about the fact that we are soon will have 17 goals, something like about 170 targets, right, which is the risk is that we will have nothing because there are so many options that I'm not sure that this can be helpful in order to drive our agenda in terms of development, as well as also in terms of our capacity to monitor and to target, to empirically verify this kind of indices. So I'm just curious to know what is your point of view on this.
Could I?
Yeah, sure. Definitely.
Okay, I think you have raised three issues. I mean, on the first question of simplicity and everything, I have a golden rule I always follow, and that's if I can't explain things to my grandmother, then that's not good. That's the rule I always follow. So therefore, I think your point on the whole question of the simplicity, the clarity, and to explain things is absolutely important. We economists have things, we have a tendency of making things very complex, which should not be necessarily be complex in any way. So the basic dimensions, the basic human development index, even keeping it as it is, because it has not only simple, but it has also earned a credibility, and we should not destroy that. So keeping it at that, in that way, then we should explore what we can do. For example, one of the issues that Joya has made, okay, we all know that there are stock variables in the Human Development Index. Because of the stock variables, life expectancy doesn't change that much. So the question is whether you should have a kind of a measure for efforts, because after the publication of each Human Development Report, it becomes quite difficult to explain it to the political animals or the political leaders. We have been taking so many measures over the last 2 years or 3 years. I don't see any progress in the Human Development Index. The question is that the lifespan of a politician is 5 years, but the Human Development Index goes more than that. So whether there can be a kind of an efforts there, effort approach there, that's one possibility. Another possibility is that, which has been tried, I think, in the Indian state of Madhya Pradesh, you keep the dimensions as they are. You keep the dimensions of a long and healthy life. You keep the dimensions of knowledge. You keep the dimensions decent standard of living. But whether you can explore other indicators. So in terms of long and healthy life, rather than taking life expectancy, whether any kind of mortality measure, say under 5 mortality, would be a better indicator, and which is more sensitive to policy changes. That can be another approach one can actually explore. The third one is that I'm a great believer in disaggregating the Human Development Index, because when you disaggregate it not only in terms of gender, but also in terms of regions, in terms of different social and economic groups, you actually unmask the national average. And we all know that famous joke about national average, or average actually, half of your body may be in the oven, the other half in the refrigerator. On average, you would be comfortable. So I think by doing that kind of a disaggregation, you actually can see a picture of what is happening to your society, and then can take measures. So the end point is that we'll keep the fundamental and the basic as it is, but then we'll try to explore different things. I mean, some of the suggestions have come from Jaya, some of the suggestions have come from Gail, and also we'll have discussions and on all those issues, and then see what it can be done there. So that's one. I'm quite intrigued by your third point on sustainable development goals, and I think our position is very simple. I have been involved with the MDGs a lot, so even not going there. I think the sustainable development goals, their their selections and all these things is an intergovernmental process. But the Human Development Report is an intellectual contribution. So it's not for us to basically A, assess or monitor those goals on behalf of the UN system, no. B, to tamper with that particular process where it is an intertemporal process going on. But C, will definitely try to contribute intellectually, quote unquote intellectually, to that particular process, saying if we think of the sustainable development, what are the kind of the indicators, what are the kind of the goals that countries or at the global level or at the regional level can think of. So because this is an independent report to UNDP and not a report of UNDP, we take that position a little bit distance from that particular process there. And therefore, I think there were lots of pressures this year to have that report on sustainability. We resisted it, because the moment we do it on sustainability, then we'll we'll burn our fingers. I mean, let's put it that way, because people will then say that we're trying to actually temper and influence an intergovernmental process. So we are not actually going there. But your points are very, very thoughtful. Thank you.
Take answering the other question.
Okay, another question, please.
Sorry, I had some sort of questions that I've wanted to ask someone who works in UNDP for some years, and so there are two slightly different questions. One is that when I teach I think I must be one of the few people who teaches the change in the HDI in 2010, because I think a lot of academics aren't aware of the change. And classes that I teach are not entirely convinced that the new HDI was any better than the old. And I've always wondered why the HDRO didn't choose to present a series of HDIs in the way that as national income accounting developed, we have the GDP, the GNP, the NNP, and so on. So you have more than one index rather than just dumping the old one, which a lot of people liked, and introducing something that a lot of people don't understand. I think that's the politest way I can put it. The other thing is, in 1988, I was working with Mahbub al-Haq for a few months before he lost his job and went off to work with the UNDP. And at the time, I remember what you stressed actually in your talk, was what he was very interested in was accounting and replacing national income accounts or developing something parallel to national income accounts. And I think everyone talks about these other accounts, and Enrico was gesturing to them in terms of these satellite accounts. And I just think that everyone sort of mentions it, but if you look at the reports over the years and the way that developed, I think there's a lack of conceptual clarity or consistency with which all that material has been presented. I mean, if you compare it with the way the national income accounting has developed, which is incredibly clear and has been accepted all over the world, and, you know, I think that's probably, in retrospect, something, even though we say it's very important and so on, that might have gone better.
Well, my answer will also be twofold, since you have two questions. One is that why don't we have a series of HDI, GNP, GDP, GNI? They have different conceptual definitions, definitely. They differ from each other, which one, something may be better for some purposes, others may be better from other purposes. I'd rather say this kind of series should be the kind of the work of the academic world. I mean, this is, yes, because this is, that is what you should do. I mean, then we'll see what you have come up with, and then we'll try to deal with that issue. If we have 5 HDI in the Human Development Report, that would be very confusing, and that would actually lose the kind of, yes, it would be. I mean, yeah, exactly. Then you have a particular country having 5 particular ranks in 5 HDI. I mean, that would be not only be confusing, I think we will lose our basic message there. So therefore, I think we'll stick to one. We know it is imperfect. We know it is not perfect. But I will rather try to collaborate with the academic institutions and request you that you try to explore that kind of different approaches, and then we can have a discussions, and maybe we go forward. On the GDP has been in the map for more than 50 years, and HDI's age is only 20 years or 25 years. So we are just half the age of GDP. So therefore, I think the HDI is still in the process of evolving. But I'm not sure with your particular point whether the theoretical foundation of HDI is any less robust than the GDP. I mean, if you look at the GDP, exactly, if you look at the GDP and you have the expenditure methods, you have the output methods, and you have all these things, and you have just jumbled that, right?
I meant the accounting.
Accounting of what? In what sense?
I think Mahbub referred to it as human accounting.
No, actually, Mahbub didn't refer to it. Actually, Amartya referred to it as human development accounting. Anyway, yeah, Mahbub was too much preoccupied with HDI. Anyway, yeah.
Talking about 1988, and I was talking to him.
In 1988, yeah. Okay, that's before my time, so I don't have any issue with that. But I think if you think of the accounting, and that's basically what we have talked about this dashboard and that kind of things, and then Gail also talked about making it more dynamic, not to be a kind of a static situation. Yeah. You want
No, I just wanted to add just to what you just said in terms of a comment to Enrica, what Enrica said. I think, yeah, I think we all like being simple, effective, and easy to control, and I agree that you have a certain credibility for your index, and we want to maintain it. But I think we should also not lose out in the development debates that's happening, and where, I mean, a lot of social movements have come up, and inequality and other things have become as fundamental as the basic dimensions that are in the human development. So I would like to see, in addition to the HDI, and you don't want many HDIs, I know, but just like you have a non-income HDI that you also publish, I think we could have a broadened HDI, if you want to keep the core HDI as it is, a broadened HDI, because I think that would show that would give a sign that you are following the development debate and reacting to it, or are part of it. And the development debate now, as you see in this SDGs and other things, is very much revolving around inequality, sustainability, and other things, inequality being part of social sustainability. Yes, I think we should be simple, but just adding a couple of more dimensions, at least in my opinion, it's not going to completely destroy the simplicity of it. We can just still come up with an aggregate index which could be easily interpretable and easily, I'm not sure to your grandmother, but probably to the general audience, we could easily explain. So I think, and in fact, you have the credibility to be able to do it. You can say 25 years of experience, we've been able to put this on the market and sustain it. Let's put something else, a broadened vision of it, and I'm sure UNDP has the credibility to do that for the next 25 years. So my idea is, let's, yes, keep it simple, but I think the excuse of keeping it simple with the excuse of keeping it simple, we cannot ignore things that have become fundamental over the recent years.
No, definitely.
Another question? Can you go on a microphone? Thank you.
This morning there was a session on global justice, and one of the speakers was arguing that we need to move beyond discourses on redistributive justice towards question about what kind of people should we be and how can we relate to each other. Taking insights from the critical theory, from Fraser and Rainer Frost, who was last year at the speaker at the conference, how to include these issues of power and domination, which are actually at the heart of the crisis, of the ecological crisis, at the heart of the inequality, and will the Human Development Report, as an intellectual contribution to policy, tackle these issues of power and domination. Like now this morning we were talking about, the speaker was talking about natural resources and how the high human development achievers have a huge interest in dictatorships and low human development achievements in natural resource-rich countries. So I know it's a very politically sensitive subject, but as an intellectual contribution, would the Human Development Report be bold enough to go into these issues of power, domination, and relations between institutions and businesses? Would be another area that would be, that the HDR hasn't looked very much into, but is critical to development, employment, and so on.
Yeah. Even without going into whether there's a conspiracy theory or not, I think that's a very important point on the whole question of the power and domination. I mean, even in the whole question of the gender relations within the households, if I bring it to the micro level, that's absolutely important. At the macro level, the whole question of the globalization and how the globalization is taking place is absolutely important there. It would be a fascinating subject for an HDR, and thank you. I mean, we'll definitely look at that particular issue, because it is also related to the issue of the collective choice that I have talked about. You may have a collective choice of, say, minorities in a particular society, but that may be overshadowed by individual choices of some people, or even the collective choices of ethnic majority. So I think this is a very fascinating subject, and I think the HDR, one of the characteristics of the HDR has been its raw courage, if I may say so. So therefore, I think this is a particular issue that we would definitely be looking into as we move forward. May not be in my tenure, but definitely it's something we'll keep in mind, and we'll try to deal with that issue. Yes, thanks.
if I can say, just add one word. I confirm that it's certainly a very big topic. I just want to to say something about the intellectual debate that was launched, let's say, by the work by North Wallis and Wengast, on social violence and social orders. To say just the following, in this kind of work, it seems to me that my colleagues are just assuming that violence is at the root of social relationships, in a sense, and that the whole task of building institutions is to try to neutralize this violence. So I just raised the question, do we agree that at the philosophical level, violence is at the root of social relationships or not? And if not, does this mean that we have to believe in the utopia that there is something like an absolutely peaceful social order that we could reach within human history? You see what I mean? For instance, in John Rawls' viewpoint, it's clear that this should be the eschatological viewpoint that we should look at. And the second point I want to mention is that, especially in the work by North Wallis and Wengast, the way they understand institutions as being tools that could neutralize violence, it seems to me, is just a translation of the very standard neoclassical microeconomic theory about perfect and imperfect competition. In the sense, political competition is the best way to get rid of violence, in the sense that this forces everybody, especially the elite, to give back the rent that they have. You see what I mean? And so open access countries are just perfectly competitive markets, and limited access countries are just imperfectly competitive markets. I'm just also wondering whether this is the right way to understand institutions. It seems to me that the avenue opened by Elinor Ostrom in terms of common goods is much more promising. And it's also a way to understand how we can neutralize violence, it seems to me. Yeah, another question.
Thank you very much for the presentations, very illuminating discussions. I have a question about the something that you haven't discussed much is the what is happening in the market of reports themselves. I mean, we have a lot of reports coming out every week, and very good indexes coming as frequently as those, and I wonder what are the plans to rediscover what you do, especially what is an strength of the DRO is that you have I mean, you name hundreds of reports, but only 25 are global. And those are being ones mainly in the discussion, but you have a richness of people in each country doing a lot of stuff and also regional. And those kind of fall outside of the reach of a DRO. I mean, you have a difficult relationship with that, but I wonder how much you can think more organically or strategically to use this richness of localizing knowledge and trying to do more bottom-up, growing up of this system of human development instead of keeping the discussion about what we do with the global.
Okay. Let me answer it in a two-pronged way. One is that the market of the report. I think reports and also the indices are a growing business now. We all know that. To give you some figures is that we generally now produce the report in hard copies, and also we put it online. And I think hard copies about 120,000 we do every year, the global report. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think my memory serves me right, the downloads of the reports is 235,000 on average. Some years it's good, some years it's bad. The blogs and everything that we put there, on average, get about 80,000 hits. So I think in terms of the markets and reaching out to people, both in terms of hard copies and also using the social media, is quite diverse, quite big, and increasingly people are now using the latest technologies to read the report, download the report, access the report, and not so much the hard copies. On the second question that you have raised, in every report, what we basically do is also to look at national, subnational, district level human development reports, because in Brazil or in India there are also district level human development reports, and we try to bring it to the global level, some of the innovations that they have done to the measurements and the indicators. I just made reference to the Madhya Pradesh, which we have picked up, to some of the themes that they have touched upon. For example, in Latin America, there's citizen security is a big theme, whether it's the National Human Development Report in Chile or other processes. Some of the surveys, particularly the perception surveys that they have done, and bring them to the global report either in the form of a box or in terms of part of the messages or part of the analysis. We definitely do that. And down the road, one human development can really be on taking this kind of things from the ground at the global level, at the national level, at the subnational level, can be a great theme for a global human development report. We now have more than 700 national and subnational ones, and the richness of analysis, the richness of data, the richness of approaches, the innovations that these people have done are quite well ahead of, in some cases, what is the thinking and everything on the global level. If I just can take 30 seconds to do a kind of an ad, we are also having a global forum of human development in February in Stockholm, in collaboration with the government of Sweden. And the basic idea is to have academics, researchers, advocates, students, civil society organizations to bring there and to discuss some of these issues. It's not only the issues of the analytical breakthrough, but also the measurements, also how to reach out, the outreach issues there, how to do data innovatively. Jaya has referred very kindly to the data visualization that we have done. So some of those issues we want to do it. So the next year would be quite a interesting as well as a kind of a milestone for the Human Development Report as we try to deal with those issues.
So I'm afraid time is running, so I suggest that you should have the last word.
Well, I just wanted to say that the fact that there are multiple reports, I mean numerous reports and numerous indices, and the market is becoming huge, is in fact, I would say that it is a sign of success, and it is showing that there is interest across the world, not only among people who are closely connected to the UNDP, but also in the general academic and policy circles. And I think it is going in the right direction if it is expanding. And I think that is the pioneer role that UNDP and HDRO has played is very important there. And I think we should. I come back to my opening sentence that congratulate the HDRO for its work since the launch of the first Human Development Report. And with that, I end my concluding words. Yeah.
And I suggest we should end here our session. Thank you.
Thank you.